Hello and welcome everyone to When Gender Doesn't Fit in a Box, presented by Bank of America, Microsoft, and Out and Equal. We are thrilled to have a wonderful group of panelists here with us today. We'll get started with introductions soon, but first want to do a really quick item of housekeeping. So we have been trying to figure out the best way to collect questions. So we know that y'all are going to have some really great things to add and to ask. We will have time for that at the end. We ask that you keep all of your questions in the Zoom webinar chat. So we will do our best to collect all of those and come back to the end, but feel free to add anything there as we go along and you think of it. Okay, so we're so excited. Let me go ahead and start our introduction. So my name is Megan Crockett. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I started working for Bank of America back in 2012. I am on the transgender and gender identity support team within HR. That's my day job, as you might say. My day job is supporting employees that have been impacted by domestic violence and large events such as hurricanes and wildfires. So with that, we will move on to Erin. And Erin, if you will share your pronouns, what company you work for, what your role is, and any other relevant information you might want to share.
Thank you so much, Megan. My name is Aaron Roberts. My pronouns are she and they. I look like your mother and I sound like your brother. You'll get over it. I work for Bank of America. I was hired as an out transgender lesbian. Gender non-conforming, that's never changed. And also, sir, I work in business controls and enterprise process oversight for the bank, and I've been with the bank for, almost 10 years, and I also serve on the national board for PFLAG. So I think, Sarah, I believe you're next in the queue. So Sarah, take it away.
Thanks, Erin. Hey, everyone. It's really nice to be here today. My name is Sarah. I use she or they gender pronouns. I work at Microsoft in the Global Diversity and Inclusion team, and I'm the LGBTQI plus communities lead. I've been at Microsoft for a whopping 3 months, and before joining Microsoft this summer, spent the last 6 years at New York City's public hospital system, where I was also the LGBTQI plus communities lead. So super excited for our conversation today, and Madeline, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you all so much for joining today. My name's Madeline Jelpe. Pronouns anything respectful is fine. I am Senior Manager of Stakeholder Engagement here at Out and Equal, and so happy to be here talking with you all today. This will be my 5th summit. I've been at Out and Equal, I guess, just a bit over 3 years. So happy to continue to do this work. I help some of our write some of our resources, some of which I will talk to you about today, including our best practices for non-binary inclusion and what's your pronoun strategies for inclusion in the workplace. So I'll touch base on that in just a bit, but thanks so much for joining and looking forward to talking with you. And I'll pass it to Alex.
Hey there, I'm Alex. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm proud to be Latinx and even more proud that my father was Afro-Latino. I've been in the business for 25 years. I've been at Bank of America for about 14 years. So when I do talks like this and panels, I often talk about my bathroom experience at work. I know, exciting stuff, but it's basically me looking around to see who may be in the bathroom, who may have gotten up and run to the bathroom. It's about the anxiety I feel when I take the long walk to the bathroom that's way clear across the building, hoping that there's no one in there, or if they're in there, they're not going to be at the door, because it's really their expressions that really get to me. It's that startled, you're not supposed to be here look that they get on their face, and then it's the recognition, oh, it's just Alex, you can come in. Now, I know this is hard for you guys to imagine, but just imagine being away from the office for 7 to 8 months. Some of us have some gray hairs, a little more gray hairs than we had. Some of us maybe put on a pound or two. I think I have. But I want you to imagine what it's like to be in the office next week, going back to a trading floor. Imagine that you're me. Imagine that you've been taking hormones for the last 7, 8 months, and that you now have some peach fuzz, or what I like to call my mustache. You're Alex, Alex with a mustache. Now it's mid-morning next Tuesday, and you have to go to the bathroom. You're not comfortable using the men's room because it's quite filthy in there, but you have a lot of anxiety using the women's room. So now you have to take a walk clear across the building to the elevator, take the elevator down 2 flights to go use the single-use bathroom. You hope it's empty and you hope it's in working order. Now imagine the amount of energy I have to spend thinking about this, worrying about this, and how much energy this takes out of my workday. Thank you.
Alex, thank you for sharing that very personal story. That really helps us all to understand more of why we're here. So Stacy, if you'll go to the next slide, please. I think that's a perfect segue. So what are we talking about and why is it important? Often we fall into the trap of referring to gender in the binary, but we have to remember that that's not how gender is at all. So for those of you who may not have been familiar with the term non-binary before you joined this session, we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So it's a term that's used to describe people whose gender doesn't fit exclusively into that male or female bucket. It can include people who have no gender, who have a gender that's other than male or female, or even more than one gender. So that includes, but it's not limited to, people who identify as genderqueer, gender expansive, gender fluid. And if you can imagine, there are 38 states in our country that don't allow a gender marker that's other than male or female on state identification. So imagine living in one of those 38 states where your state ID does not match the gender that you identify with or express on the outside. Next slide, please.
So we're going to spend the next bit of time both, sharing some personal stories and going over a few of the many best practices that we hope our organizations and many other organizations, steps to take to create more inclusive and welcoming and safe environments for folks of all genders, particularly those of us who are non-binary, et cetera. So, Alex started off with their story about using the restroom. So let's start off by talking about how we can make our restrooms safe for folks to use at work. You'll see on this slide a photo of an all gender restroom sign. That really is the goal, right? So having all gender restrooms that are single user on every floor of our offices or every floor of our facilities. Why do we need to say all gender? Why do they need to be on every floor? Well, just as Alex was mentioning, why should folks need to travel a farther distance or spend that much energy trying to figure out where is a bathroom that I can use that's safe? How far do I have to travel to get there? What I love about the sign that we've included on this slide is that it doesn't reinforce any gender stereotypes. So I've worked with a number of organizations in the past that will say, yeah, we've got all gender restrooms in our facilities. And then you get there and you see the sign with the, male figurine next to the female figurine. That's not really an all gender restroom. That is showing me a stereotypical figurine of a male and a female. Or the little symbol that's like a half person in a dress and half person in a pants. Again, why do we need to reinforce gender stereotypes? Let's just communicate what this space is. It's a restroom. So a toilet image will suffice. ADA accessible imagery will suffice. It's not realistic necessarily. If it's not realistic to have all gender single user restrooms on every floor, or in as many places as possible, there are some baby steps that we can take as we make our way towards that towards that goal. So we can put up signs in multi-user restrooms that clearly state what our organizational policies are, right? Hopefully we have organizational policies that protect everyone's right to use the restroom where they feel safest. So let's put a sign up if we can't have an all gender restroom that says, hey, you know, it's Microsoft's policy. It doesn't say, hey, you know, but the sign would say, you know, it's Microsoft's policy that anyone can use the restroom that's consistent with their gender identity, or anyone can use the restroom where they feel safest. So at least there's some imagery on the wall that someone could point to if they feel like they're being challenged for trying to use a restroom. And Erin, I think you have a story to share with us as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is really important, this concept, because the stereotype of, you know, binary is just everywhere. And like I spend my life trying to put people at ease or not trying to make people more uncomfortable than they are. And really, I just need relief personally. So I typically go to female restrooms because that matches my anatomy. But the thing of it is, like, I warn my closest friends and colleagues and family that, like, when I go there, we don't talk. Like, I don't talk. And when I forget, like in my own facility, my own floor, it's pretty safe. Everybody knows me. It's not a large number of people. I go in, I go out, we're chatty Cathy's, and it's not even a big thing. When I'm at another campus occasionally, and this did happen, doing an LGBT strategy conference and go to the restroom and just chatting away, like, you know, and then somebody, oh my God, there's a man in the restroom. And okay, that's bad, quiet, we go. And then we leave it alone, wash our hands, come outside. There is an entourage waiting for me to find out who the man in the restroom was. Well, I was thankfully with a straight ally, blonde French Canadian who has a way with words and a gift with people and a smile, and she was able to diffuse it. But like, this is real, and the idea of having a toilet that doesn't reinforce these stereotypes. This is an all gender restroom. Everybody has a need, and everybody needs to relieve, you know, take care of that need. Like, I just think this is the right way to approach this whole thing.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, it's very important for us to hear the kind of emotional energy that goes into normal everyday things that we all do. So thank you for sharing that story. I will say at Bank of America, we have a very similar bathroom policy where we've stated everyone is able to use the restroom of the gender that they identify with, but we still have some limitations. We don't have you know, single gender or all gender restrooms on every floor of every building that we have. We are moving towards that, but we don't have that as of right now. We also don't have this fancy all gender restroom sign that you see here. We have the one that's got the, you know, the two stereotypical man wear pants, women wear dresses or skirts signs. So we still have a long ways to go. But we are trying to push forward and have made the decision to, in every one of our new builds and on our renovations, to add an all gender restroom that everyone can use. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to jump in here and just talk a little bit about my my dress code experience. Being on a trading floor and working with clients, you have a certain standard that you're supposed to have to the public and to your coworkers. But a few years ago, I decided that, you know what, I need to dress for me. I need to make myself feel better and more confident. So I started to wear a tie. I took the brave step and I put on a tie and I walked into office. I got a lot of stares, no comments. And I did this once a week for a little bit. And then I went to twice a week wearing a tie, coming in, gaining more confidence. Meanwhile, I'm buying dozens of ties. My closet is full of ties. You can't imagine how many I have. But by that time, another non-binary person in my office, Linnea, she saw what I was doing. She gave me approval. She nodded. She knew I was trying to live my truth. And from there, I said, you know what? Every day, I'm wearing a tie every day. Even on casual Friday, I decided I'm going to wear a tie. And that's my image and how I brought it to work. Now, the thing with dress codes, our dress code says you can wear whatever is comfortable as long as it's respectable and businesslike and presentable. But the thing is that we don't tell this to people. We don't tell managers that, you know, that we have this dress code that you can wear what you want. And there is no structure, there's no gendered dress code. So a lot of people don't know this. Even recruiters, when they're looking at an incoming intern class, they don't realize that unless we tell them that there is no dress code. As long as you're respectable, businesslike, you're fine. So communication is very important. Thank you. Next slide.
Thanks, Alex. And again, thank you all for joining, and thank you to my other panelists who've just really shared some excellent stories here. You know, as we're talking about gender in the workplace and the inclusion piece, pronouns come up as a really pivotal part of that. And so from our Out and Equal standpoint, more and more companies are talking about this as sort of a hot button issue, wanting to get involved, wanting to figure out how to be more inclusive of pronouns in the workplace, how to implement practices to really share those in sort of a routine sense throughout the day. So we'll spend some time talking about that in just a minute, and some best practices to demonstrate that both interpersonally and on a company level. But before we do that, I think it's worth sharing a little bit about, you know, why are pronouns important to us? Why are they important to me? I saw a question earlier about, you know, what does anything respectful mean? And for me, pronouns are such an important way for me to articulate my identity to others. You know, with gender, I think there just tends to be so many assumptions about you know, how someone looks or how they act or behave, what their name is, and we automatically associated gender with that. And I think we all, as we're joining the session, can agree that, you know, gender identity isn't always outwardly apparent, and it's not necessarily something that we see. And I think for me that's really important. My pronouns express my gender identity in a way that, you know, I think people like to make assumptions about me based on my appearance. I'm typically read as someone who uses she, her pronouns. But in reality, you know, it's a lot more nuanced than that. My gender is fluid. And it's important for me to articulate that part of my identity to others because it affects how I see myself and navigate throughout the world. And it's important for that truth to be told to others around me. So, you know, when we make assumptions about gender, I think that we forego the truth of an individual in favor of simplicity. And I think that we all really deserve more than that. We all deserve to be seen for how we see ourselves internally and individually. And so that's why pronouns are so important to me and so important to build these into conversations in the workplace. And I know Erin has her own perspective, so I'm going to toss it over there for an additional perspective on pronouns.
Thank you, Madeline. I worked really, really hard for people to get she and her. Like I was assigned male at birth. You probably did the math on that. That was right. That was not right. I knew that wasn't right. And when I came up a long time ago, like we had two choices. Like you had to prove, if you were transgender, you sort of had to prove that you were transgender enough that you could pass as wherever you needed to be or what you were going to do. I'm 6'2", I'm loud. There's no chance I'll ever pass. I didn't even want to pass. Like I just wanted to be me, right? Even when I came out to my kids, like I did all I had was the half man, half woman stick figure. And I used that to explain I was neither male nor female. I was both male and female. Like the whole gender binary, like I was always a they, them. But like when I was in 6th grade, I remember, you know, getting that can't have subject plural agreement issues, subject verb singular plural agreement issues. So they got really, you know, trained out of me really hard. And so I worked really, really hard for she and her. And I get that from my deepest friends and people that know me. But honestly, if I'm reflecting on who I am and what I am and what my options are, I've never really been she or he, and I've always been human. I've always been they, them. And like, so now that the language is there, and that's why I was so excited to get involved in these panel discussions and this work with the bank and externally, is because you know, gender truly is not a binary thing. And I know it's ingrained in us, but it just doesn't work for everybody. If it works for you, great. But if it doesn't, you know, you need another option.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, I love what you said. You know, you're human. And I think that the words that we use for ourselves help us articulate how we see ourselves. And I, for that reason, really loved coming to terms with my own identity as like sort of anything respectful for my pronouns, because that's where I fit. That's what makes sense to me for my identity. And I think we all deserve to sort of fit where we are situated on this gender spectrum, so to speak. So we could talk about this. I wish we could share all of the different experiences on this panel of how people feel about pronouns, because we all have sort of a unique perspective on that. But in the interest of time, I want to get into some of the interesting pieces of the resource that we put together. And I think that we can go back just one slide. Thank you. Yeah. You know, Out and Equal created this unique guide to provide best practices around pronouns in the workplace because we get this question regularly. People want to know who's doing this work and how they're doing it. What are some really concrete pieces of practical advice we can use to implement better practices around pronouns in the workplace? And I think there's certainly a lot of curiosity and motivation to do this work. Employers are increasingly seeing the need for this, the need for guidance for several reasons. You know, how we talk about gender is more expansive than ever before. Nearly half of Americans now see gender on a spectrum and feel comfortable using gender neutral pronouns. 74% of Gen Z respondents in a recent survey said that employers should be learning and using an employee's pronouns and chosen name. And the data tells us that, you know, there are certainly big motivators to be doing this kind of work. And we're excited to see that businesses are asking Out and Equal quite regularly about how to do this. So in the guide, we talk about inclusive pronoun strategies through two different levels, organizational and interpersonal levels. On each level, there's certainly a lot that employers can do to make it more inclusive. Overall, I think that what we're aiming for is to have conversations about pronouns be commonplace, to be a part of the routine that we have day to day in the workplace. And that can be done in many ways. Starting meetings and events, introducing with pronouns. So for example, I might say, my name is Madeline, my pronouns are anything respectful. Or utilizing gender neutral greetings to address groups is a simple way to do that. A simple way to start building that foundation, that routine of talking about pronouns throughout the workplace so that, you know, people are feeling comfortable about it and knowing how to talk about it. Many companies have now added pronouns to email signatures or now provide opportunities to list pronouns during the hiring process or internal company forms and records. Others are embarking on efforts to include pronouns on name badges or pronoun pins that employees can use throughout the workday. You'll probably hear stories like that throughout Summit this week. In addition to those company level things that you know, folks should be doing wherever you're working, we also need to be prepared to talk about pronouns on a more individual level. We use pronouns in our everyday conversations with people. They're unavoidable parts of our conversations. And so in terms of individual connection, colleague to colleague connection, as a best practice, you know, we want to be avoiding assumptions around the gender binary, as we've discussed before. We want to utilize curiosity about our colleagues and check ourselves in these interactions to avoid that instinct to jump into a binary or make assumptions based on someone's name or appearance. So a few guiding things. If you're unsure if someone's pronouns, ask. As a best practice here, you may want to first listen to how others close to someone may be addressing an individual with their pronouns. Of course, that's not foolproof, but it does give some indication on what pronouns they may use. And then, of course, introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, because that provides an opportunity for someone else to share their pronouns with you, or at least start that conversation. You know, one of the most difficult things that I think people find around pronouns, especially for those who are less comfortable talking about it, is they're worried about what they might do if they make a mistake. That happens more frequently in verbal interactions when we have less time to do intentional thinking around our pronouns. So just a few things to think about, you know, as you address your own mistakes. I think you can learn a lot about yourself and others and how they address the mistakes they make. So it's important to ensure you're holding yourself accountable to treating your employees with dignity and respect. So addressing your mistakes sincerely and calmly, saying, I'm so sorry, you know, I did not mean to misgender you. Apologize, correct yourself. Could be something simple. You may say something along the lines of, I'm so sorry, Tori, I should have said she, or she mentioned, I'm sorry, they mentioned. Some other key pieces, don't draw additional attention because that can create some additional discomfort and awkwardness for the individual. And then thank the person who corrected you. I think that it's good to reinforce habits in the workplace of giving and receiving constructive feedback, taking accountability and respecting fellow coworkers. And then of course, taking some time to self-reflect. This, I think, for those who've not used gender neutral pronouns before, it takes some practice to do that. So ensuring that you're working on your own time to make that a reality for yourself. All of this, I encourage you to check this out in the file section on the Pathable site. We've shared this out in equal resource for you. I'll also put that in the chat box there. But there's a lot of great tips there for you to look into and how to operationalize pronouns in the workplace. So I will pass it on over and yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Madeline. I think we can move on to our next slide. I wanted to just note that I think a perfect example of what you were just talking about in regards to being respectful of pronouns. I've been watching the comments in the chat since you were talking, and everyone has a lot of great ideas, similar experiences that you were speaking to, people even helping other people fix their names, you know, if it had dead named someone in here. So I think that's also a really great segue into this next slide here. It was almost perfect timing. So sometimes systems drive an employee's experience. And this is a great example of what we've got on this slide here. So Tricia so graciously allowed us to share this, this slide with you all. She raised several years ago, actually, and something she was experiencing. She hasn't changed her legal name in our system or anywhere, but she goes by Tricia, and that's her correct name. Our systems were sometimes inadvertently outing her as transgender, as you can see on the left there. So in, you know, at the best, it was uncomfortable. At worst, it was outing her and making things a little bit harder for her at work. And so we have since been able to change that. And as you can see on the right, her correct name displays. But this is something that, you know, we want to work better towards, not just, you know, correctly gendering people, but allowing their correct names to be displayed in our systems, you know, on name badges, anywhere else that might be important. Even in small places that we may not deem to be as important, that can be a reminder of folks' you know, things they don't want to have to think about anymore. So we will move on to the next slide.
Thanks. So, you know, speaking of systems and how our systems can contribute to either an inclusive or feeling an exclusive work environment, I think it's a great time to talk about some data, right? So all of these initiatives that we're talking about are well and good, but how do we actually track whether they're working? Or what else needs to be done, or even how we're doing in terms of our you know, queer and trans folks happy coming to work with us if we don't know who our LGBTQI+ employees are, where they are, or how they feel. about our workplace experience. So, as we know, or I think most of us know, there's massive gaps in terms of data about LGBTQI plus communities, even outside of our workplaces, right? I just filled out a US Census form. Everyone should do that if they haven't already. You can skip the gender question and your response will still count. So when I was filling mine out, I identify as non-binary, and I had to list myself in a same gender household, even though my wife and I do not share the same gender identity. So we could somehow be counted as somewhat of a queer couple, right? So we don't collect data about LGBTQI plus communities. And at least in our workplaces, I think our organizations can actually help fill that gap while it's not happening in the rest of our societies. So as I mentioned, we can't really measure the success of our inclusion initiatives or even really understand the issues that our communities are facing at work if we don't provide the option for folks to actually identify themselves correctly on our forms or in our HR systems. This is definitely much easier said than done. There's a lot of considerations that we have to think about as we move forward in terms of collecting this information about our staff. So for example, at Microsoft, we're a global company. We've got employees that work from many different countries around the world. So as we think about how we collect or how we implement what we call self-ID, so the collection of information about someone's sexual orientation, whether someone identifies as trans, their gender identity, et cetera, that involves a lot of partnership with our legal teams in the locales that we're looking to collect this information in, the local HR teams. It involves a lot of thinking about what privacy considerations exist in different parts of the world, right? So it can be complicated, but it also can be done. And I've heard throughout other sessions today about other companies who are, doing a good job of collecting this information. So it's just so important that we make progress here, because as the slide title so clearly states, we don't count if we're not counted. So it's so important that we start to collect this data. The other thing that I'll call out, we don't really have time we could do an entire seminar just on self-ID. And in fact, if there's not one this year, then let's make it happen next year. But the other thing that I'll call out about thinking about self-ID is just clear communication about it. So this is something I think we've heard from our other panelists today as well, is, hey, it's cool that we have these policies, but if we don't talk about it, or if people don't know about it or understand it, how much does that really change what it feels like to come to work? And that's really important with data collection. Even as someone who does LGBTQI plus equity for a living, I still get a little bit like, ooh, why do they need to know that? Even when I was registering myself as a speaker for Out and Equal and was asked my sexual orientation, I was like, ooh, what are they going to do with that information? So it's so important that we communicate to our employees why we're asking this information, how it will be maintained confidentially, how it will be used. I think that's super important. So I think we can go on to the next slide. And before we keep going here, I do want to call out that as we're nearing the end of our prepared remarks, we're going to move into Q&A in just a few minutes. So feel free to start typing in your questions. I know there's already been questions and comments pouring in, but just as a heads up to start getting those questions in. We want to hear about, what you're thinking, what your organizations are doing. This is an opportunity for us to learn just as much from you all. So we're excited to get into the Q&A piece.
Yeah, and Sarah, to your point, I have been monitoring the chat since we've all been talking, and I have jotted down some questions. So continue pouring those in if you've got a burning question, and we'll do our best to answer it.
Amazing. Thanks, Megan. So, the policies and the benefits and the initiatives that each of us have highlighted in this very short time are just a snapshot. They're just a few of the things that our organizations can do to build, what we can think about as the foundation of a truly inclusive culture. They're definitely only pieces of a much, much larger puzzle. So we're not suggesting that any of our organizations have solved this entire problem, nor are only if you do, the 4 things we've called out in the last 25 minutes, congratulations, you've fixed workplace culture for non-binary people. So they're just a piece of the larger puzzle, right? And at the end of the day, though, policies and benefits don't remove bias from humans. So you can have every possible best practice in place. I think some of our organizations can implement 100% of what we've talked about today, and a non-binary person can still have a negative experience at work. So, it's worth calling out that this does not necessarily mean that we've changed how humanity functions and changed our cultural norms just by implementing, some inclusive policies and benefits. I think there's a few things. I'm going to pass it off to Erin for a story in a minute, but just wanted to call out a few things that we can think about in terms of how do we move the needle on culture? How do we start to actually remove bias from humans? Nobody has figured that out yet. If anyone knows the answer, please call me or Microsoft. We would like to have that conversation. I think one thing we can think about here is education as a tool for change. We haven't really talked about, the pronoun resource that Madeline highlighted is amazing, but even beyond that, how can we use education as a tool for change? How can we promote learning among our colleagues that will lead to a better understanding of our communities, more empathy for our communities? Something that I noticed at Microsoft that I thought was pretty cool. I mentioned I just joined the organization 3 months ago, so I have all of my onboarding experience very fresh in my memory. And I was watching some learning video that was part of my new employee orientation package. And I noticed that during some role play scenarios, the characters introduced themselves with their pronouns. And it wasn't a training that was related to diversity and inclusion. It was just like how to fill out your tax forms or something like that. And I thought that was really awesome because it, again, normalized that practice outside of the diversity and inclusion context. So, there's still a long way to go. I think these policies and benefits are an excellent start. But again, we can be doing all of the above and still not have a great experience. I know, Erin, the story about I think the story you're about to tell kind of exemplifies exactly the point that we're trying to make here. So I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, if you think back to the bathroom experience, like Bank of America has the best policies that we can come up with, and they're continually improved. And we have annual training to make sure that everybody knows about that. But think about the disconnect between, oh, you can go to the restroom that you need to go to, and then, oh my God, who's the man in the restroom, right? The culture and the workplace, the policy and the reality. It's the gap that we work to close, and allies help close that gap. I can't close that gap. And the other thing I want to mention is sort of about the data and the metrics. I'm kind of a data geek a little bit is, I love that this outside of a box concept, because like we can't manage what we can't measure, and we got to measure. I get it. But I've spent my whole life being too masculine, too feminine, not masculine, not feminine enough, too non-binary, not non-binary. What I'm going to say to you is, you think about your strategic leadership and what you want to do, like just understand that for those that are negatively othered, typically our authenticity is our superpower. And, the answer is not just creating more boxes or more categories for us not to live up to, right? Or to not fit into. And so that's what I love from my definition, a queer perspective of like, lock boxes and lines just don't even matter. It's like, who are you? Anybody can describe me. I get to define me. I'm queer. I'm human. I'm Erin. Like, that doesn't get any deeper than that. So thank you so much. And I forgot who's next.
I'm going to kind of jump in right here, if you don't mind. You have to remember just what Erin said. We're human and we make mistakes. I make mistakes. My wife makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. Just last week, I was on a conference call with my team, and someone misgendered me on the call. I didn't even know that they misgendered me. I didn't even hear it or pick it up. But this person texted me during the meeting, said, "Can I call you after the meeting? I have something to tell you." And I said, "Oh, what did I do this time?" I had no idea what he wanted to talk to me about. And he gave me a call and he said, "Listen, Alex, I misgendered you. I feel awful. I'm trying to do better, but I just want to apologize." So that act by one person in the team, that was amazing to me, for him to reach out and to just make me feel a little better, even though I didn't even know it. He needed to do that. He needed to tell me that he's learning and he's trying. And that's all I need. We're trying. We're all humans here. We're all trying to get by. We're big companies, Microsoft, Bank of America, we're huge companies, we're mountains. And to move us it takes a lot to move us, but if we all kind of push together, we'll get us all in the right direction. I know it.
So, okay, I think we can move on to the next slide. So we have talked a lot, but I want to point out the fact that there's no way we would have been able to cover everything. So here's a couple additional, or more than a couple additional things to take into consideration. I've seen in the chat a few times mention of internal communications or even external communications. So I'm sure there are a lot of written policies and procedures, SOPs, all of those things that your company has written down somewhere. That may seem like a huge task or undertaking, but there are other things you can do. You know, making sure that anything new that's written doesn't have gendered language. Starting emails with, you know, not ladies and gentlemen or sir or miss, but using non-gendered language like tea or hi everyone, things along those lines. You know, take it small. You don't have to move the mountain all in one piece. Additionally, are you able to create a one-on-one support model? So at Bank of America, we have the whole team that is dedicated to supporting transgender and gender diverse employees. But that may not be possible at your company. Is there someone at your company who feels passionate about this and can partner with any transgender or gender diverse employee that may have questions that they can go to vent, you know, make them aware of the gender neutral dress code that you have or health insurance that covers transgender health care? Is there anyone in HR, anyone on your team that might be able to pick this up and start it in a more informal fashion? The little things help. In addition to that, employee resource groups. Those are huge. Just having that community at your company, you have other people that you work with that go through similar situations. Those folks can be wonderful in helping build that community. Are you able to create mentorships? Sometimes just having someone who, you know, to Alex's point earlier, you know, the uncomfortable situation going to the restroom. Is there someone that will, you know, go with you to the restroom if that would make you feel a little bit better? Things along those lines. And we also know that there are things we haven't talked about here, and maybe things we haven't even implemented at our own companies that maybe y'all have implemented or thought of. So continuously be thinking forward. And, you know, although something may not be possible at this moment in time, there are things that you can earmark for the future, or, you know, compromises that you might be able to start working on now that you can tweak and perfect earlier or later on along down the road. But don't be discouraged. So at this time, I believe we are open for Q&A. So you don't need to submit your questions in the poll. We have abandoned that. So I have been monitoring things in the Zoom chat. If you've got any additional questions, I'll do my best to pick things out while we're talking. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. So I have grabbed a few. There have been a lot, and I apologize if I'm not able to get yours. This one I think can go to everyone. We had a couple of questions about pronouns. So I'm going to read two that kind of go along with each other. First one is, if someone is gender fluid, how do you know how to address that person with their correct pronouns? And the second one is, the toughest I've seen is when people are trying to show respect with sir and madam. Doesn't feel like there is an equivalent for individuals. Any suggestions? So I'll open that up to any panelists that would like to answer either one of those questions or both of them at the same time.
I'll just say that I like to introduce myself first and give my pronouns first, and that leads the way for them to share their pronouns if they want. And not everyone wants to, but if they do, there you go.
So
And I'll just add, I'll tack onto that, and then I'd love to address the sir or ma'am piece of the question. That was something that working in healthcare for many years and customer service and patient politeness, that came up a lot. I think it's also okay not to know someone's pronoun and use their name until you know, or, you could ask as well if you already know the person is gender fluid. You could be like, hey, I just want to make sure I'm communicating respectfully. What pronoun do you use? I use she or they, right? So exactly what Alex said, use yourself as an example to introduce. In terms of the sir or ma'am piece, I think it's something that is very culturally specific as well in certain communities of folks who use those terms to indicate politeness. And what I used to coach our teams in the hospitals that we worked at is when they greet someone, you can still say, hi, how are you? How can I help you today? Or how's it going? Or what can I do for you? And the tone of your voice and your facial expression will communicate that same level of respect and politeness as using sir or ma'am. So that would be my advice on that second piece.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the introing yourself is a big one. And I think if you're ever confused about someone's pronouns, defaulting to their name is great too. Something I noticed in the comments and want to sort of tease out as we talk about pronouns is, when we do ask questions about pronouns or when we introduce ourselves with pronouns, always ensure that it's voluntary for the other person to share theirs. I think that we want to make sure we're not putting anyone in a position to be disingenuous about the pronouns that they use. For fear maybe they're just not ready to tell you them, or there may be different situations why that might happen. But the best practice in sort of learning another person's pronouns is by introducing yourself, like Alex said, and Sarah. And generally that's kind of an indicator of the person also sharing theirs, but they might not. So just adding that piece in there.
So at the pool in a bikini, little kids to their mom, like, is that a boy or is that a girl? And you know what I said? I said, if you don't know, if you ask politely, that's not offensive. And then it was just silence. Mom packed up everything and took the kids and left. I guess she just presumed I was a cis female until I let them know. So, groups, y'all, esteemed humans, esteemed colleagues, lots of respectful terms, individuals, names, and let people tell you. And if you genuinely and respectfully want to know, just ask that way. Like, if you relate humanly to humans, it can go pretty well for you. So it's really not that difficult.
Thank you, Erin. I like that, pointing out that we're all human. Good thing to remember. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to move on to another question. Is it possible to discuss how, from an intersectional outlook, professional is often interpreted through a white supremacist lens? That often things are coded as deviating from whiteness can be seen as unprofessional. So this goes to our topic of dress code earlier. Anyone want to take that one?
So I'll just say that, yes, I agree 1000% with the fact that our standards of professionalism are racialized. I don't know if I mentioned this. I'm based in New York City. I used to work for the city hospitals, which is quasi-city government, and the New York City Human Rights Commission actually, made a little bit of news recently for making hair-based discrimination a human rights violation in New York City, because that was something that was happening, that it was considered both in schools and in the workplace. We were seeing higher rates of folks being either disciplined in schools or, facing barriers in employment because of hairstyles that were racially specific, so dreadlocks, et cetera, or wearing natural hair, et cetera. So yes, I think just chiming in to say, yeah, yes, And in places where we don't have local policy to protect that, I think it's something that's worth taking up at an organizational level. How can our companies be thought leaders there, or take a stand there if our local governments, or if not everyone has a human rights commission that's as progressive as New York City's, for example. Maybe that's something that our organizations can take up as well.
Yeah, I'm white as it gets. My kids are brown. They got it from my ex, and like I've always, loved brown people, and I knew lots of people didn't love brown and black people, but I thought they just didn't know any better, and there weren't very many of them. And like after I came out, and I have to say, the people that saved me from myself were Black queer women. They're my mentors. They're my life. They gave me power. And even in the LGBT movement, if you trace it back, like we wouldn't exist without queer Black people, period. And so to realize that identities and just humanness is weaponized against certain people, I think the first step for us that don't face that every day is to see it, acknowledge it, and then just like I try to teach allies to call out bad behavior towards LGBT people and help them do better and learn and be better, like it's on us as white people to stand up in a room and say, wait a minute, and I mean, I'm learning and I want to learn better, and I might be ignorant, but I'm not going to be willfully ignorant. I get to choose that. And so, teach me, help me learn how to be a better, more effective ally. And I want to do that. But the first step is acknowledging that this is broken and we need to fix it.
Any other thoughts on that before we move on?
I think it just points at that important question that, when we do any of the work that we do in LGBTQ inclusion work, it has to be done with thinking about other groups as well, those who encounter oppression in different ways. And so the intersectionality piece in all of this is absolutely crucial, and we are not really achieving inclusion if we cannot ensure that, for example, dress codes are targeting another group. We need to ensure that it's sort of inclusive across the board. So I appreciate that question, and I think it's a good reminder for all of us to have those questions and analysis in our mind as we do this work together.
For myself, that's why I introduced myself with saying that Latinx. I normally say that I'm also disabled. I'm learning disabled. I wear hearing aids in my ears. I check a lot of boxes. I check all the boxes. I always tell my boss that I cover all the bases. It's such a deep conversation to have about, being othered in so many different ways. I'm outside of the world, and in the color of your skin, who I choose to love, how I see my gender, all the way out of mainstream here. I'm off 2 blocks away.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, Alex. Thank you. I think this one might be directed towards Sarah. So Sarah, I'm gonna let you answer this, and then if anyone else has any thoughts on it, we can go there too. How do you design data collection that is forward compatible for new developments in society? How do you best advocate to migrate old data to these new frameworks for legacy systems?
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an engineer. So I missed the beginning part of the question. The second part was about how we migrate data from legacy systems into the new systems. Was there a first piece of that is distinct from the second?
So I'll read it from the very beginning. How do you design data collection that is forward compatible for new developments in society?
So I'm going to be very blunt in that I do not know the answer to the first part of that question. And then I'll let anyone else on the panel chime in. I think the issue of legacy systems, though, is such an important thing to talk about when we're talking about self-ID and inclusive data collection, because I know in every place I've worked where I have driven our efforts to change the way we collect data and change the way we allow people to identify themselves, I always have a legacy system that I have to either work against or work with. And an example is at the health system that I was working at before Microsoft. One of the systems that we had to integrate our new gender identity fields into was a DOS-based system, which is just a blue screen that you type code into. And they were able to change that. So pretty much anything is possible is all that I know. I don't know how they did it, but they updated that system to be able to more accurately collect non-binary genders. And I think this is where partnerships with different groups in your organization are so key. As I mentioned, I don't know how to build the code for the systems to collect that information, but I know the end result that we're hoping to get. So it requires a lot of partnership between folks in our IT departments, folks in our legal departments. What does the consent look like? Folks in anyone who has anything to do with these systems that we're working on, we have to work together to make sure that the end user experience is the same as what we're hoping for, and that it actually works and is compatible across our systems. So I'm sorry that I can't answer your question in more specifics, but what I can say is that don't let a legacy system be your barrier to moving forward on these data collection initiatives, because if the city hospital system in New York City can update a DOS-based medical records program to make that happen, then any of us can do it. It just takes work and sometimes time, and sometimes that means multiple years and many, many meetings and many, many groups of people to make it happen. But if someone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn or out of this webinar, I can try to get more specific information about the actual engineering pieces that go in on the back end to that, and see if I can make a connection for someone at Microsoft who knows a bit more than I do about the inner workings of that, to get that info for you.
Yeah, and Sarah, what I would add with the qualifying statement that I'm also not an engineer or data analyst, and probably should not be one, but is understanding that there may still be limitations. I mean, at Bank of America, we are government contractors, and so we have to provide binary information, but there are still ways that we can, going forward, make innovations and put these requirements into any new development that's going forward. So we, as the LGBT plus community, want to have a seat at the table when those things are being developed, so that we can have raise our hand and say, what about this? Has this been considered? I understand that it may be harder to develop, but this is where the future is. This is where we're going, and we're going to need to have to include this information going forward. So it needs to be there.
Have more LGBT people at the table. You got to have them at the table. You have to have someone speaking up. That's it.
Just muted myself. It helps to have communities like this as well. Big kudos to Out and Equal for having these types of conversations and for having that global hub where we as companies can come together to share information as well. I know sometimes our natural inclination is to not want to share our proprietary information or just information on how we make things run with other companies. But in this arena, it's important to share. There may be things that we're struggling with that Microsoft has figured out how to do, or vice versa. So come to those types of communities and share best practices as well, because that's how we get better together. Okay, so this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists, Bank of America, Microsoft, Out and Equal. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences and for being here today. Thank you to all of our attendees as well. Without you, we wouldn't have been here. I want to give the table over to Madeline, who's got one additional thing she wants to kind of soapbox for, and then we'll be done. Stacy, could you go to, I think, the slide right before this?
Oh, I think it's getting out there, but I just want to let everyone know we're going to be continuing this conversation on International Pronouns Day on October 21st. We'll be hosting a panel for all of you to check out, where we're going to dive into some deeper conversations around pronouns, hear some additional case studies from companies on how they've implemented different practices in this regard, and also overcome some of the obstacles that we frequently encounter in this arena. So in the interest of shared building and collective learning, I really hope you all join that. And it's going to be a great discussion. So keep on the lookout for some information coming out about that over the course of the week. And just really thank you so much to Bank of America and Microsoft for this excellent panel and your expertise in this area. It's wonderful and helpful for all. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. So with that, we are going to end. Thank you for joining When Gender Doesn't Fit in a Box, and everyone enjoy the rest of your summit.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all. Thank you.